This is Orange Nation Overtime with Stephen Fonte and Paulie Sibilia.
Welcome into Orange Nation Overtime, everyone. Alongside Paulie Sibilia, I'm Stephen Fonte. Some news came down just prior to us hitting the air this afternoon, and that is that the SU football team will open up the 2027 season in Toronto against Wake Forest. It is Wake's home game, so the 2027 dome schedule will not be impacted. Wake had 5 conference games, and they decided to move one of them to Toronto to get into that week 0 schedule. So it'll be a nationally televised game, neutral site. It will count as a conference game for both these teams, Paulie.
Yeah, it's a good thing. You got a year to prepare. It should be more of a home game for Syracuse because it's only a 4-hour drive. Go get your enhanced license now and make a trip of it. Let's go. Have fun with this. Don't be angry. Because there's some people that just get mad whenever anything different happens.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing, too. And now, there's that component of viewership
Yes.
In terms of the ACC and how they dole out the money.
There's usually like 5 games in week 0, and you can play them on Sunday, Monday, Friday, and you just find yourself a niche, and then you got all eyes on you.
Exactly, and I think that is certainly the idea. We also had a chance to talk with Ryan Daly on the show today, one of the new assistant coaches on the basketball staff, one of Jerry McNamara's guys. It was our first chance to talk with Ryan Daly.
I think we may have talked to more assistant coaches on this staff now than we did on the last staff in 3 years.
That is quite possible.
Except for when Jerry was.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So we spoke with Ryan Daly, and we asked him, first and foremost, why Syracuse? How did it come to be that he ended up here?
I met Jerry when I was probably 16 years old. Coach had recruited my high school often. We had a player named Derek Jones Jr. He's in year 12 in the NBA now. He went to UNLV. But Coach and Coach Boeheim were always recruiting at my high school, Archbishop Carroll in Philadelphia. He kind of, I would say, obviously was not recruiting me. I was a late bloomer in terms of where I ended up playing and the level I reached. But he kind of always, was taking me aside saying, hey, I think you're going to be pretty good. I don't know, what the Philadelphia area schools aren't seeing right now, but, give it a few years, keep working. And then, that was kind of the intro. And then I'd say we had a decent relationship when he had taken the job at Siena. I was at Albany after my second year. I was actually about to leave to go to Bryant University, but when he got the job, we kind of connected again just about the area, players, kind of in the area, things like that. And then over the last 2 years, when, he had success at Siena, they beat us at Bryant, actually. And then I went to VCU this previous year, and we kind of always stayed in contact. So just kind of, surface level early on when I was, 16, 17 years old. And then over the last 10 years, I'd say we've gotten closer. Obviously, we'll get really close this year and the years in the future. But, that's kind of how it happened. And, he had a good game against Duke in the tournament. We had beaten Carolina at VCU, and then we lost to Illinois in the round of 32 on a Saturday. And then I would say early that following week, maybe Monday or Tuesday, we had kind of spoken, and then, the wheels kind of went in motion.
How did your coaching journey start? Is it something you've always wanted to do since you were a player, or is it something that just kind of happened?
My family grew up coaching, a lot of them. My dad he was a good high school coach. He moved on to Boston University as assistant and then Penn State. My grandfather was the head coach at St. Joe's. My uncle's coach. My cousins are in the business. When I got done playing, I got cut in the G League in February of 2022. And I'm not the type of person to go to Europe for even a vacation, at least not yet in my life. So, the idea of living over there for the next 5 to 10 years was not something that I was interested in. And I was fortunate enough, I got an assistant coaching job right away in that summer at the University at Albany. So, I didn't have to go through the grad assistant video. I fortunately, Coach Killings believed in me. And, from there, I kind of got my journey started.
You mentioned a moment ago, Ryan, that you've kept in touch with Jerry for the last 10 years or so. What was it about the opportunity to work with him that you felt like this was the right fit for you at the right time to come here? Yeah,
I think I grew up in the Philadelphia area, so when I was growing up, Rick Jackson, Scoop Jardine, they played in the league. Dion Waiters, I've played against Tyus, I've played against Malachi. Syracuse always had the orange. You kind of knew they were going to be playing in March. And to me, that was an opportunity. And then second, Coach McNamara, he's one of the he's a competitor. I think of myself as a competitor. I think he's kind of wired. I'm kind of wired like that, and the opportunity, and I know how much this place means to him and the other staff members we have that have spent significant times here. And that was an exciting opportunity to, just join a program in the ACC. Join you see that orange S, you kind of know what that stands for in the history. And to me, it was kind of I left a great place. VCU is an unbelievable place. It's unbelievable from the administration down to the academics weight room. I left a special place, but I had a feeling in my heart this place could be special if we worked it. So for me, it was a hard decision just leaving the special people I was around, but it was kind of something that spoke to me like, hey, go follow Coach McNamara.
You mentioned Philly and the Philly players. How important is it for Syracuse to get back into that area recruiting?
I think it's very important. Right now we don't have anyone from Philly on next year's roster. We have a transfer from Temple who's a Delaware kid, which is a similar area. Trevor Cooney obviously was up here. I just think all recruiting areas are important that Syracuse has touched over the last 20 years when success was really rolling. Obviously Philadelphia, DC, New York, there's just been a heavy emphasis on the 95 corridor up here. And, players come from all over, as you've seen. Illinois obviously had tremendous success with, a lot of Balkan players. But for us, I think, having a presence there and, kids from my high school went to Syracuse, like just regular students. So just having that imprint in that area for me and for this program, I think is a big deal. But, we're not just limited, obviously, to the 95 corridor. When you're a good player, you're a good player wherever you are.
You just touched on Aiden Tobiasen, and he recently mentioned that you were one of the first college coaches to recognize his game in high school and that you helped get him to Temple. Can you tell us that story? What stood out about his game? And have you, I assume you've stayed in touch with him over the years as well.
I would say that I did spot him I was at a random gym. It was thunderstorming. I actually was with my other coworker at Albany, driving back to Albany, and we stopped at a random gym, and there was not a coach there, and there was this baby-faced kid. He had like 3 threes and had like a left-handed dunk, and he had not an inch, he had not one hair on his face. So, I kind of, called his AAU coach who I knew. I was at Albany at the time. Now, I know he said I helped. Temple found him. They found him because he kind of blew up over the next, 6 weeks after that. And I did not have contact with him out of respect because those guys over there are very, very close friends of mine. But, when he hit the portal, it was kind of a full circle moment because, I was at Albany and he was a baby-faced high school kid who, from a public school in Delaware with a local AU team that not many people knew. So, to connect back again with him was great. Obviously, he hit it off with the rest of the staff. He was someone that, when he announced his intentions to enter the portal, I thought, his talent was, a no-brainer. And Coach McNamara and the whole staff agreed. And, they were fortunate to have him joining the program.
You mentioned you had G League experience. He's doing the G League Combine. What does a player get out of going to that?
I think, for Aiden's still 19 years old. He's turning 20 in a week or two. Actually, May 11th, so 4 days. But, for him, obviously, I know that there's been people interested in him and his future. Obviously, I think it's valuable for him to get in front of, real NBA executives and get the feedback because, he knows what he needs to do and work on next year in terms of accelerating his growth and developing his body and his talent and the mentality he needs. But, yeah, I think right now, he kind of goes through that process, trains right now, just gets ready. I think that starts on Saturday or Sunday. And then, just take everything they say, like good and the bad, and really work on it the following year. Starts, as soon as he gets back, to be honest with you. That's kind of how I view it, and the staff views it as well.
We're still trying to get to know the new players on this roster. Garway Dwell's another guy that you brought in, to fill the point guard position. What can you tell us about him and his game, and what SU fans should expect about him, from him moving forward?
Yeah, I think Garway, he's experienced, he's played, started a lot of games in the Big East. Garway's young too. He's very young, physically or age-wise, which has a real, in my eyes and the staff's eyes, a real their better days are ahead of them when they're filling out, because they're playing against guys that are 23, 24. So every day that passes, he gets an athletic advantage. In talking to people that have coached him, they just said he's a maniacal competitor. He's maniacal competitively, dives on the floor. Just really gritty. We had I was fortunate enough, and everyone kind of has had players that are really, really good defenders. And, I had one last year at VCU, and I know what it brought to our team, and I know the games we were able to be in and be competitive in because of, this perimeter defender. So I would expect him to, hopefully, keep developing his outside shot. It's improved a little bit. It improved a lot, last year. And I think the defense and the edge he gives, with his size, he's another guy, 7-foot wingspan, 6'11" wingspan, just someone that competes every day. And I know for a fact, I've talked to some people who have played against him, and they do not enjoy when Garway guards them.
Have you been able to see the guys that are coming back and work with them yet in Sadiq and Kyan? Yes,
absolutely. They're great. They have real experience in high level games. Obviously, in traditional worlds, everyone expected, before this portal became something, you made a big jump into your sophomore year. I think everyone who's been around the game would tell you that. So we're extremely lucky to have two returners who have real minutes, and they're obviously Sadiq's a crazy athlete, great defender, great kid, willing to work. And then Kyan, obviously super talented offensively, keeps developing. His trajectory over the last 24 months as a player has been pretty impressive. I saw him probably when he was a sophomore, junior at Lehigh. And to see kind of what he's became and how his body's filled out and how he keeps working is impressive. And, all new coaching staffs need that. We were a new staff last year at VCU, and we returned 3 guys. And it's just huge for program continuity, understanding the plays, understanding, this is what we expect out of, Syracuse players. So we're excited about both of them, to be honest with you. I think their talent speaks for themselves, their character. I didn't know them as people, but, in the last 3 weeks getting to know them, I could see why they're a great representation of Syracuse.
One more about the guard position before we move on. Aiden Tobiasen had said in a recent interview that he's comfortable playing the one a little bit and can handle the ball and handle some of the point guard duties. In terms of those point guard duties, who on this team do you feel is able to to run the point? Obviously, Garway Dual. It sounds like Aiden Tobiasen has some comfort. We know Ryan Mesh, local kid from Chittenango. Who are you comfortable with the ball in their hands?
It's funny. I don't know which coach it was. It was an old call I saw. It was like a clip I forget who it was. So, but basically, the point guard position is whoever brings the ball up. But you can have, like, Francis Folofak's an unbelievable pressure reliever if you're getting pressed, right? I think at VCU we did a good job last year. We had 3 or 4 guys who would bring the ball up in a different possession. I think when you recruit positionless players, positionless backcourt, especially with size, which we've done, obviously Ryan Mesh, he's not as big as the other ones, but he's faster than all of them. He's faster than all of them. He plays with a chip on their shoulder. So I like you mentioned the names. I think everyone is kind of comfortable playing the point guard in a pinch. Obviously, we don't know until we get everyone, but I think we're all comfortable with all of our backcourt options bringing the ball up. And like I said, Francis can be another guy who he was a front court guy, but he's a pressure reliever. And I've seen the value of that at other spots. I know you guys have too, probably. So the point guard position, you got to be a rock star from the shoulders up, obviously. And but we're excited about the positionless, and the versatility we have in the backcourt with the size and the shooting ability of, some of the guys we have, and the speed that Ryan brings is a different dimension.
And along those lines, Ryan, you've got a reputation as having a great offensive mind yourself. You worked with Phil Martelli, as we mentioned, at Bryan and VCU. What style of offense do you envision these guys playing? I know you haven't gotten everybody together yet. There's a lot of time between now and October and November. But what do you envision offensively going into next season?
Well, I think I only have been – I don't know why people have said that about me. I think because I could score the ball a little bit in college. I could score it a little bit in college. The one thing I'll say is for any good offense, you need good players. There's coaches in the NBA right now, there's coaches in college who maybe they've losing seasons and they've won 27, 28 games the previous year. Well, I can tell you what changed the roster, So to have, a good offense, you need guys who make shots and, play the right way, play unselfish. It's so early in the process. You don't know what you have until you get them, like I just alluded to. But I'm excited. I think we have guys who can shoot. We have guys who can, get off of the bounce. We have guys that are unselfish. You need a well-balanced machine. I think the days of having 2 guys averaging 19 to 21 are kind of over, to be honest, with this new 1 year, you kind of got to stack talent as best you can, and kind of roll the ball out and have some like organization and obviously some semblance and some play calls. But you really need guys who really know how to play, because basketball is it's for me, at least when I played, I always thought it was random chaos. Like any drill I do, it doesn't matter if I can't get by the guy, right? So you need different people who can get by people, play out of closeouts and stuff like that. So I think the best thing for good offenses is, one, good players, and two, selflessness.
One more question from me on roster, the roster makeup. We saw you guys dip into the international market. We've seen the international market kind of blow up here this offseason in particular and recent years. Is that something you think that you guys will continue to explore moving forward to try to go overseas and bring in some guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you've seen the success. Like I said, I lost Illinois in the NCAA tournament. I know what those international guys did to us at VCU. And there's plenty of guys who have had tremendous success from overseas. I would say we're not limited to any area. Like the best players we can find, we're going to try to go get, whether they're in Serbia, or whether they're, local kids like Gavin Doty, and who's a terrific talent. Good players kind of come from all over. I think what you've seen now is with the influx of NIL, and, it's kind of been a European model with 1 year, 2 year, commitments for players. I think it's made Europeans want to come over to the States more. So I think for us, like, of course we'd love to lean over there. There's a lot of talent. Abdurrahman Sibi and, Mark Moran and Mamatovic, they're talented, right? And, anyone that comes and can play basketball, we're interested in that where they're from, or, what country they lived in growing up, or where they played pro over there. To us, it doesn't matter. They just got to be able to play and represent Syracuse the right way as kids.
Really enjoyed our conversation with Ryan Daly, and he does seem comfortable with what they have at the point guard position, in addition to Garway Dual and Aiden Tobiasen and Ryan Mesh. And, as he said, he mentioned Francis Folafat could be a pressure breaker. That was an interesting nugget to come out of that interview. Anything stand out to you, Paulie?
No, not really. He broke down the roster. It does take some of the, the fear away, but of course the coaches are going to hype up their guys. But yeah, no, he seems like a good dude, and he seems like he's going to fit Syracuse fairly well.
Young guy, not even 30 yet, but is doing very well in this profession, and I think Syracuse is lucky to have him, and it sounds like he's really enjoying his time here, his short time here thus far. Only been here about a month or so, but this coaching staff certainly off and running. We did talk lacrosse today on the show as well. We had Dan Aburn from Inside Lacrosse. He was on with us to talk about the NCAA tournament, and we led him off by asking him about SU's first-round matchup against Yale.
Well, I just want to say, I think that anybody who's playing in this field in the NCAA tournament is ducking anybody. Like, I think every single matchup outside of the top three presents a pretty even, close matchup. So I think when you look at Yale, which Syracuse has drawn, it's a pretty hot team. They won 6 games in a row before hitting the Ivy League semifinals, where they got out to a big lead against Princeton before the Tigers got their feet under themselves in that game and ended up winning 12-10. So I think when you look at Yale, it's a team that's about as hot as anybody playing in the country right now. So this is going to be a close one, and be happy to answer any other specifics about the game. What do you think is going to happen matchup-wise? But I think it's going to be a pretty fun one in the Dome.
Andy Shea's one of the 6 local head coaches in this field of 18. Grew up just down the road from here in Cortland, and ties to Lemoyne College as well. And you look at the job that he's done this year with that Yale squad. Everything we keep hearing about them is they're so young and that they're ahead of schedule. Should he be in consideration for National Coach of the Year, what he's done with that team, the way that they've finished the season and the way that they've, they're hitting their stride at the right time?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think he could be on the short list along with a guy like Tim Cox at Siena, who's, navigated that team through a lot of tragedy. But yeah, when you look at Yale, you nailed it on the head. It's a really young team. A lot of their best players are sophomores, to be honest, including Connor Gately, their attackman, and Ben Friedman, their goalie. So yeah, have them ahead ahead of schedule, I think Andy Shea deserves a lot of credit, and especially because last year Yale was a pretty poor defensive team. They decided to make a coordinator change in the offseason, and that unit is looking a lot more buttoned up this year. And it presents an interesting kind of matchup scenario with Syracuse, because you do have a pretty good on-ball defender, and a guy like Patrick Bassano, who will probably be more than likely going against Joey Spallina. So this could be a game where, I think Yale's going to want to make it in, a half field game, not try to get into a run and gun situation with Cuse. So yeah, I think Andy Shea's done a great job. And like you said, I don't think anybody really had Yale on the radar at about mid-season, and then they just came back to life, won those 6 games, got into the Ivy League tournament, and notably beat out a team like Maryland as the last team in the NCAA tournament.
This particular matchup, and then we'll move on to some big picture questions about Syracuse. But, as we have been delving deeper into the numbers throughout the week, Yale, top 10 in offensive efficiency in the country, number 1 in the nation in man up. What is the biggest concern for Syracuse with this matchup, and what do you think this game ultimately comes down to on Sunday?
Well, watching their game against Princeton, Connor Gately, the sophomore attackman I alluded to earlier, he had a ton of success against Jack Stahl, who notably held Joey Spallina to double bagels in their game earlier in the season. They had a lot of success using the 2-man game and attacking from behind the cage, and then also picking on Princeton's shorties as well. So I think if you're Oderna and Gate in that Q staff, you're looking at that film pretty closely, and making sure that your defense understands their assignments, understands their rotations, and is prepared for when they attack your shorties and try to isolate some of those guys on an island. I think on the other end of the field, like I mentioned earlier, you're probably going to have a pretty good on-ball defender in Patrick Bassano defending Joey Spallina. So I think that this could be an opportune game for a guy like Finn Thompson, who makes all of his money off ball, finding holes in the defense, drawing some of those defenders inside, possibly opening up step downs for guys like Luke Roa and Michael Leo and other players on that team. And then also in transition, like I mentioned earlier, I think, Yale's going to want to make this a half field game, slow it down. So if you have the opportunities to find, early offense or find a goal in transition, I think Syracuse would be smart to utilize those opportunities. So I think it's going to be a relatively low scoring game. I think Syracuse likes to play a little bit more low scoring, especially when they're in the dome and they have that advantage, especially for the goalie position. So I do think that this could be a little bit of a tighter, slower affair, but there might be some big moments where we see a goal in transition or something like that could ultimately decide this contest.
All right, let's, for the sake of argument, let's say that form holds in this bracket. Let's say that Syracuse, gets by Yale. Let's say that North Carolina advances as well, and that sets up a third game between these two conference opponents to go to the Final Four. Do we in the media make too much of that idea that it's really difficult to beat a team 3 times in one season? What do you make of that matchup if we see it again? And we know that Owen Duffy is a question mark health-wise, but how do you kind of size up that matchup if we're to see it for a third time?
Well, I would love to see it. I think, a rubber match between these two teams would be great, just as a neutral and for the fans. Both games this year have had interesting narratives to them. I thought, the first game between these two, Syracuse was pretty thoroughly outplayed. And then in this past weekend in the ACC tournament, I actually felt like Syracuse kind of had Carolina on the ropes until late in the game when that unsportsmanlike conduct penalty kind of flipped the game and was all Carolina down the stretch. I think I think number one, you're going to have to stay buttoned up and you're going to have to stay pretty disciplined, because you can't let a team like Carolina, who is really good on man up, has a ton of stretch shooters like Don Petramala, who you don't want to give him any extra space and an extra defender to not have to worry about. So, but I do think that, this game played on a neutral site probably goes a little bit more evenly. I just think it's going to be a classic ACC slugfest. If it were to come down to those two teams. And I do think that, obviously with Carolina, they have a ultimate X factor in Brady Wambach. If Johnny Mullen at the faceoff X can kind of even get close to 50-50 and give their offense plenty of ample opportunities to go toe-to-toe with that Carolina offense, I think they can make it an even game. And, I wouldn't predict it to go any more than 2 goals to either team if they were to meet again in the quarterfinals. And obviously, like you said, Owen Duffy's a huge question mark. I don't have any insider information on that, but it seemed like a fairly serious injury, and he's a guy who's had a pretty lengthy injury history. If he were to not go, that would be a pretty big deal for the Tar Heels.
Syracuse is hosting for the 3rd year in a row, hosting a first-round game, and we've seen what Gary Gait has done since he's taken over, and, progress each year, a step forward. And they got back to the Final Four last year, but you obviously know what the goal is at Syracuse. It's to win national titles, and he's yet to accomplish that. The senior class has yet to accomplish that. I bring that up. How would you evaluate the job that Gary Gait has done to this point for Syracuse lacrosse?
I think he's done a pretty good job. His tenure has pretty much coincided with this pretty robust recruiting class that we're now seeing as seniors. And I think that they've kind of gotten the job done. They've pretty much gotten Syracuse kind of back into the national spotlight. They had a pretty horrible year the year before Joey Spallina showed up, and he kind of put that on his shoulders and said, hey, I'm going to bring Syracuse back. And getting back to the Final Four last year after such a pretty serious drought, I think was 100% a step in the right direction. But I think when you look at this year's team, there is kind of like a sense of urgency to really get it done and to really not only get back to the Final Four, but really put yourself into contention for that national championship. And I think that's always what, players and coaches are going to be defined by when you go to a school with such a prestigious history in the sport as Syracuse. But I think overall, I think Gary Gait's done a pretty good job. It'll be very interesting to see how he, steers the ship after this year, regardless of what happens in May here, because he's going to be working with a lot of new players, trying to, figure out a new lineup when you pretty much graduate your entire starting attack. So I'm more interested in seeing how he handles the winds of change after this year.
Joey Spallina obviously is the headliner of this senior class, and we saw the Tewaaraton finalists announced the other day. Joey 1 of 5. Is he the favorite in your mind, or does it completely come down to what happens in this NCAA tournament in terms of, like, if he gets to the Final Four, he wins it. If he doesn't, does it go to somebody else?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. If I'm like a Vegas bookmaker, I think he's the betting favorite to win. And I think that's just because we've seen how prolific he can be. But I truly do think that, especially in the context of this year's Tewaaraton race, it really is going to be whoever goes the farthest and possibly who wins the national championship. And that could include a guy like Sean Light, who is a defender, and a defender has never won the Tewaaraton trophy on the men's side of the award. But I truly believe that he is in contention. I think he's extremely highly regarded, but I truly do believe that whoever goes the farthest amongst those candidates is going to win the award this year.
And we should point out that John Galloway, who we had on the show at the beginning of the week, did win his play-in game. Jacksonville took care of Robert Morris in Pittsburgh last night. They did so easily. They jumped out to a 4-1 lead. I think they were up 5 at the break and just kind of put it in cruise control. Ended up winning relatively comfortably and moving on now to take on Notre Dame this weekend. So, again, 6 coaches from this area, 6 head coaches in this field, and we'll be playing this weekend.
Yep, and Monday we'll actually have a result to talk about in any sport, and that'll be a good thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Hopefully it'll be a win.
Yeah.
It's National Nurses Week. We discussed this yesterday. Today is National School Nurse Day, Steve. You ever go in there and fake a tummy ache so you could listen to Doug Logan call a Big East game?
Difficult for me because my mom worked at the school, so that was a tough one for me.
Yeah, that was a big thing for us during the Big East tournament.
So what I would do is my mom was the librarian. I would go to the library and, maybe try to, sit in the library for a little bit and, see if I could listen to the game or watch the game there. But no, I was not I was not faking illnesses.
Might change my dinner tonight because it's one of my favorite things. National Roast Leg of Lamb Day. You're not a big lamb guy. Yeah, I like lamb a lot.
Okay.
Lamb's probably behind ham, my second favorite.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Huh. All right. Gonna go to
Didn't know that about me?
Gonna go to Wegmans and pick up a nice lamb chop?
I might do that on the leg, whole leg.
Okay.
I'm gonna eat it myself. Bite down on it by myself, like a caveman.
All right, is that all you got?
Yeah, that's all I got.
Okay, we got to go then. For Paulie, I'm Steve. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you again tomorrow, everybody.
Download the WSYR Plus app on your TV to stream News Channel 9 for free. Just go to your smart TV, search WSYR Plus in the App Store, and download to start streaming today.